Hi, everyone. Welcome to Live with Marketers, our talk show where we talk shop with some of the brightest minds in marketing. I'm Ty Heath, Global Lead at B2B Institute. The B2B Institute is a think tank that researches how to accelerate growth in business-to-business relationships. We collaborate with experts to investigate how marketers can create more value. Speaking of value, we've spent a lot of time talking about the relationship with marketing and sales and how we can create more value. And everyone knows that our marketer's most important audience is the customer. But there's a relationship that we could perhaps pay a little bit more attention to. I know you know what I'm going to say because you're here today. It's the CFO in the finance department. So just like the customer is always right, the CFO has the final say over your KPIs, your budget, and therefore our success. So in this time of economic downturn, it's important for us to align and think about how we create maximum value. So before we dive into the topic with our speakers and introduce them, just a few housekeeping items. If you're following us on social media, feel free to use the hashtag #LiveWithMarketers. This show will be recorded, so it'll be available for you to view afterward as well. And then we want to hear from you throughout the conversation. So you may be following us on the Slido console. You may be following us on the LinkedIn Marketing Solutions page. Either way, feel free to chat with us and also submit questions into the forum. And we'll try to get to all of the questions we can at the end of the show. And with that, I'd like to bring in our speakers for today. All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to Live with Marketers. And so today we have Fran Cassidy.
Hi.
Hi. Cassidy Media Partnership and also consultant with the IPA. We've got Frank Cooper, Chief Marketing Officer at BlackRock, and we've got Rob Norman, former Chief Digital Officer at Group M. Welcome to all of you. And so I'm hoping you all are open to keep us on a fun tradition that we always do with our Live with Marketers speakers. Are you all up for doing a fun question so the audience can get to know you a little better?
Sure.
How can we say no to that?
There's only one answer. It's yes. Okay, so we're going with the superpower theme for this. And so where the question is, what superpower would you most like to have? And so those of you in the audience, feel free to answer this question as well in this. So what we're going to ask you here is, which superpower would you like to have? Mind reading, invisibility, teleportation, flying, time travel, or I've already got a superpower handled, so I don't need one. So Rob, why don't we start with you? What superpower would you most like to have?
Oh, I think I'd like to be a mind reader, Ty. I think I'd like to be a mind reader because I think you can help people more quickly understand what's really driving them and cut through the nonsense and deal with the issues that really count.
Right, get right to the heart of the matter. I already know what you're thinking. You've got that solution. Okay, and then why don't we go with you next, Frank? What superpower are you thinking about?
I have to go with teleportation. You know, if I can be in New York today and Sydney, Australia, in 2 minutes later, I can be with different groups from around the world. I'm going with teleportation.
Time-saving superpower. That sounds like a good one for all of us. And then you, Fran, what would you like to have as your superpower?
I'm going to go with time travel because thinking about I've got a real interest in understanding individuals and interesting people. So just thinking about how interviewing anybody from Elizabeth I to Nelson Mandela sounds a really interesting power to me.
Yeah, going back and getting all the fun questions answered. So hopefully the audience is enjoying this too. Everyone perhaps is here because they're interested in having the superpower of communicating better with finance. So with that, I would imagine, right? So let's get over to you, Fran. We're going to have Fran share some research first, and then we'll bring our other speakers back to talk about it. So Fran, over to you to share a bit about the research you've done on this topic.
Thank you, Ty. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to go through the research that I've been doing with LinkedIn over the last year. I mean, today's session is really about value creation. And my concern really is that many marketers have lost control over some of the levers of value creation in their organizations. And as a result, their power and their contribution to that has started to wane in lots of companies. So what we're going to talk about today is an approach to try and get some of that back and to get an appreciation of what marketing can contribute to that area of value creation. So what do we mean? What do we mean when we talk about value creation? We're talking about securing cash flow. We're talking about shaping distinctive products with maximum margin. We're talking about understanding customers and customer choices. But we know, what are the things that are standing in our way of that? Well, one of the biggest issues is that senior leaders and board members, when you ask them how important brands and marketing are to the organization, and it always comes up really positively. And I think at an intellectual level, they really do believe that marketing and brands are really important, but doesn't really translate into their actions. If I share some data with you here, this is a study that was done by the MSI Institute a couple of years ago. And what it demonstrates is that among the S&P Group 500, only 2.6% of board members actually had marketing experience, and only 4% of that group believed that marketing was actually really important to have on the board. And that compared to 47% who thought that finance was really important. In fact, I'm quite surprised finance isn't bigger than that, actually. But what it means is that marketing is underrepresented at board level. And clearly that means the customer is likely to be underrepresented too. So to explore this further, a study that I helped to conduct last year with the Financial Times and the IPA started to look at this in a bit more detail. And we particularly wanted to understand how a strong brand could contribute to financial priorities. So we asked FT subscribers across the world which business priorities were their biggest at that particular moment. And this is the list of some of the ones that they thought were really important. And if you look at them, things like margin improvement, future cash flow, increased profitability, I mean, these are all the things that brands can actually move, and quite significantly. But when we analysed the non-marketing part of the sample, and we got their responses to how they thought a strong brand could directly contribute to those priorities, I mean, this is the level of belief that they had that a brand could contribute to that. So there's a massive gap here. There are huge swathes of senior leaders who do not see how their brands could work. It's almost like we've forgotten what brands are actually for. So what can we do about this? Well, it needs education, it needs commitment, communication, and a different attitude. And I've been analysing this area in the last couple of years, and I strongly believe that a closer collaboration between CMOs and CFOs could transform this sort of attitude and behaviour. Now, traditionally, the marketing and the finance department often don't have a very healthy relationship, but now I think is a really good time to try and improve that. And one of the main reasons for that is because the functions reporting now into the CFO are much, much broader than they were before. This is a study that McKinsey did a couple of years ago, and it demonstrates that over half of CFOs now have responsibility for portfolio strategy and management of that. If you look at the bottom of this chart, 28% of them now have full responsibility for the digital element of their organization. Areas like pricing, nearly half of them are responsible for pricing. So what you've got here is a CMO and a CFO skill and responsibility group that are actually aligning. And what is also reflected in this list is that the CFO, who used to be the reporter of past performance, is now helping to drive performance. They are much more focused on the future, just like the CMO. It's a perfect storm of good potential powerful alignments. So LinkedIn and the IPA decided to join together to explore how this was working in the B2B marketplace. And I've been interviewing people from last summer to a couple of months ago across America, across Asia and UK and Europe. And I'm talking about CFOs and CMOs, heads of strategy, general management, and looking at the successful relationships that were evident in that qualitative base. We came up with a what I call a value framework, and it looks like this. So we have value, accountability, language, understanding, and evidence. So let's start with value. Now, to be a value creator, I think you have to understand three basic elements. Firstly, where is the value created in your organization? How are customers perceiving that value? And thirdly, a good and strong understanding of how brands can contribute value to the company on a long and a short-term basis. Now, if you're unsure about where the value lies in the organization, well, you can certainly start by setting up, regular meetings with your finance people. It doesn't have to be the CFO, but somebody that can help you to understand. I mean, the reality is that marketing can contribute on many, many levels. If you look at this chart, which is from Peter Doyle and Philip Stern in their Marketing Strategy and Management book, it shows how companies make money. And there's two essential ways. One is they go for growth, which is all the green boxes on the left, or they go for cash and a combination of cash and margin and productivity on the right in the orange boxes. And most, of course, do a combination of the two. And if you ask where marketing contributes to all of those boxes and where it contributes most, in fact, marketing contributes to pretty much every box on those charts. So the idea that marketing isn't contributing to the financial bottom line is clearly wrong. Now, the next part of understanding the value element of the framework is, of course, understanding customers. And the marketing department should be the strongest function for that understanding. But they have to be able to do that. They have to get access to them. Sometimes in business-to-business organizations, that's less easy because sometimes the sales department put a ring fence around them, but you must try and get access to them. And you have to fight for market research budget. You have to be able to get the insight into those customers that you're trying to serve. I would also say that you could do some really decent analysis of the value by segmenting your customer base and looking at it that way. Obviously, journey mapping has become very popular and very strong and very powerful over the last couple of years, but it should have some financial metrics attached to it. And also, use your marketing insight skill to uncover the emotional side of the purchase process. We know that emotional purchases are less price sensitive, they are more profitable, and creating an emotional connection is one of the most powerful weapons that marketers have in their armory. Again, on the value framework and that value point, understand the value of brands. This is my top 5 list about the value of brands. It's about margin, long-term value, preference, risk, and talent. So many, in fact, of the respondents I spoke to talked about the importance of brands to bring talent to their company. And each of those elements, not only are they reflected in the respondents I spoke to in the report, but every single one of them is relevant to a CFO's agenda. Next on the list on the framework is accountability. Several of the respondents at a very senior level that I spoke to said accountability was one of the key issues that they had with their marketing departments. We have to accept accountability for value creation, and we have to accept it outside marketing communications as well. Broadening our contribution to more areas of the marketing mix is now paramount. Next is probably one of my favorites, language. Now, language is a huge issue. We continue to use marketing jargon, and we have to start using more the language of business. If you continue to use marketing jargon, it doesn't make you sound influential or important, it makes you sound irrelevant because your peers cannot understand what contribution you are making to what is important to the organization. And we should be able, using our insight skills again, to understand what our peers want from us. We should be able to frame our language and our narratives to what works for the company and make ourselves understood. So, for example, if you look on the left-hand side there, here are some typical examples of marketing language that we would use in a day-to-day marketing meeting. The brand halo effect, salience, awareness. What is it that we're doing with the long-term focus? Well, instead of talking about long-term focus, certainly with the finance department, let's talk about cash flow. Instead of talking about awareness as a broad term, let's talk about helping to create customer preference. And that top one there, non-working media, that's a budget line that many agencies and clients recognize. That's really production costs. And one of my respondents decided to change that line in the budget sheet to asset creation. And just changing the vocabulary from non-working media to asset creation had an extraordinary effect on the way that the finance department saw that particular budget line. And it's the same. It's the same for other words in that list there. So then, when it comes to describing this sort of thing in reports and presentations, we might say, instead of something like we want to run 3 ad campaigns, we could talk about it being part of a strategic program with 3 phases. We've got there halfway down, customers prefer contact by social. Okay, so what are we doing about that, and what's the benefit? Well, the modelling demonstrates that our social activity reduces churn. And the bottom one there about NPS scores. NPS show that the help desk is weakening our brand health. Okay, so what are we going to do about that? And how is marketing contributing? So, we've got a chatbot project which will deliver 24-hour instant response, etc., etc. In fact, that line is virtually word for word what a respondent told me, a successful marketer told me he reported back to his finance person. And that's, again, described in the report. Next on the list is understanding. Once we have some understanding of how value is created, we have to be able to show the finance department how marketing can create value, and we have to get them to understand that. Part of that process is improving financial literacy. And I'm afraid to say that within marketing functions, wherever I speak, it is still something that needs to improve, and it's not hard to do that. You can book yourself on a course on the team in the marketplace. You can ask your CFO to run a series of seminars or workshops. You can work with the finance team to both co-create a marketing effectiveness course. Or you could ask the CFO to assign a finance person to you. And all of those examples are specific examples that are in the report that other people have done. And then lastly, what we're trying to do here is actually create a relationship to be able to collaborate and partner with another part of the organization. This is not just about delivering a better spreadsheet and understanding what EBITDA stands for. This is about creating a healthy working relationship. You're not going to agree all the time, of course, but you can understand what each other is trying to do. And one of the ways that you can potentially do that is, you can give a simple model to some people within the finance department that are unclear about what marketers are trying to do. This is a really basic purchase funnel, and it may make your heart bleed to look at its simplicity, but it really does help people to understand, particularly if you put the financial element in the bottom of it, to understand how you get from 100% awareness to 4% loyalty. And the last element in the framework is evidence. Yes, definitely use data points beyond just digital. Certainly the most successful relationships between CFOs and CMOs are doing that. And have an evidence-based mindset. This has come from Paddy Barwise in the London Business School. And he really strongly believes that marketers that demonstrate, if they don't have the absolute evidence that demonstrates what they're doing has a very direct financial conclusion to it or outcome, he says you can go a very long way to improving your collaboration and credibility by demonstrating an evidence-based mindset that you are looking for that evidence the entire time. When you're choosing metrics and KPIs, make them value-based, and importantly, get them agreed with your finance department. If you don't agree them upfront, then you spend loads of time arguing about the metrics and not what the metrics are saying and what you can do about it for the organization. And then lastly, on empirical evidence, don't forget there is increasing empirical evidence like the Binet and field work that's been done in the last year with LinkedIn and the IPA that will help you to not only understand yourself how marketers are approaching a very successful marketing strategy, but also will help you to sell in your work to your organization. I mean, really on evidence, what we're trying to do, and metrics, what we're trying to do is take all of those metrics that are on the right-hand side here on brand health, brand strength, the awareness, the NPS, the distinctiveness, reputation, effort score, all of those things. And we're trying to work out how they affect customer behavior and hard metrics like profit, footfall, penetration, churn, and all of that good stuff. And I do not accept, certainly in this day and age, that there aren't modeling companies and research companies that are doing this very, very well now. Just look for the people that are doing it really well. And if you want some examples of that, then they're in the report. So sort of in conclusion, I looked at the how my respondents were actually delivering and working with all these elements of the value framework. And I just sort of gave them an initial rating. It's not a quantitative sample, I know, it's a qualitative group. But it would seem that, certainly from my group, that areas to work on still for the industry include evidence, understanding, language to a degree for about half of them. But it was really pleasing to see that areas like value and accountability were being addressed and were being quite successful. So that's really what I was going to share today. Obviously, there's a lot more detail in the report. And I hope you enjoy reading it, and I look forward to discussing the content further. Thanks. Back to you, Ty.
Great, Fran. That was wonderful, and there is a lot more in the report for sure. I think one of the things that stood out to me in the framework is looking at the respondents and seeing that most people still have work to do on the L, U, and E parts of the value formula, and how a lot of that has to do with human relationships.
Yes.
And that this isn't just about, like you said, being able to explain what EBITDA means, but really about thinking about how you strengthen the trust also with language and showing evidence. So there's a lot more to it around. Yeah,
absolutely. And in the report, actually, I use the idea, in fact, of a relationship funnel. That a marketer would normally take to a customer, and you can work out where you are on the relationship with your CFO, and what therefore you need to do to get to that that point where, in fact, some of the successful brands were of where their finance department were extolling the virtues of the marketing department on a continual basis, because they had that strength and belief and credibility and trust, which is actually what you want at the bottom of a customer funnel.
Yeah, we can think about it like we do as marketers in a relationship. By the way, a lot of people responded to the survey, and it turns out that most people have an evolving relationship with the finance organization. We'll do another poll. I would love to hear, now that you've heard Fran walk through the value framework, what part of the value framework would you most like to invest in? So you just saw there's a vast opportunity for us to look at language, understanding, and evidence. But what part of the value framework are you interested in investing in? So definitely complete that poll. And with that, I want to bring in all of our speakers and have a discussion about this. So welcome back, Rob and Frank, to the conversation. And so I'll get us started with a few conversations now, and then let's actually take some questions from the audience as well. So as we saw Fran's report, and we're considering all of the evidence and learnings, we've also been out in the world, and what we're seeing in different reports is a shortened tenure that CMOs are facing, in this report itself, what we've been learning about is a loss of control of the typical levers that marketing has. And so, just considering that, is this a finance and marketing issue, or is this more of an internal marketing issue? Is this a larger marketing problem? So why don't we start with you, Rob?
So I think that the last 5 years has seen a transformation in the chief marketing officer's remit, driven by technology and by distribution. 5 years ago, few of them had to deal with a great depth in e-commerce. Relatively few of them had to deal with significant MarTech platforms, much less ad tech platforms. And the rise of technology and the complexity of and collapse of the marketing funnel has changed the role of marketing enormously. And my suspicion is that marketers have become more narrowly focused because they've had to have deeper understanding of a range of technologies and new distribution channels that their forebears did not have.
Right. Frank, you bring also the practical application in your role of this as well as Rob does, but what's your take on what's happening, how the evolution of the role of marketing?
Well, first, let me say, I think this report is fantastic. It really is. The value framework, for me at least, it resonates greatly. And as I went down every element of it, there are things that I've advanced on and opportunity areas for me and marketing within my company. But to me, the core problem is this. I think the blame goes to the marketers first and foremost, because we do a poor job of marketing, within our own companies. And if we thought about that, if we use that mindset and we said, okay, we're going to marketing, what will we do? We do what we always do. We'd start with, what are we trying to accomplish? Well, we're trying to help drive profitable growth, short-term and long-term, whatever the phrase is. But then we do the things that we do well. We look at the audience, and we know this audience has misconceptions about what marketing is and what marketing does, the role that it plays, and the impact that it can have. As Rob just stated, there's been so much change over the past years. It's a black box to many people. And so some of them revert to the old adage that advertising and marketing are one and the same. And that was once true, but that's long gone. Some actually latch onto what they consider to be the closest thing to them, like performance marketing. It's bottom of the funnel. They say, I can measure that and it makes sense to me. So focusing on the audience and understanding that language is super important. No jargon. And I've been trying to accomplish this within our company. Just strip it of jargon. There's enough jargon on the other side, and I would like to strip that away from jargon and put things in simple lay terms. I think is the second piece. But then we have to show capability, and the only way you can show capability, in my view, is to show that you know where value is being created, but more importantly, how value is perceived within the company. And you don't necessarily have to take a narrow lane. Like some people would say, let's look in B2B, let's look at that immediate client. I prefer to look at the ecosystem. How is value created in the entire ecosystem? And then how does the finance department interpret that internally? And what you'll find is sometimes they're looking at EPS, earnings per share, and you have to figure out, so what drives earnings per share? And that's where I would formulate the language and the metrics around that. And then last thing I'll say is this, is that the evidence piece could not be you could not overstate that. But as marketers, I've seen some metrics dashboards that show 19 variables. That's never going to work. You have to simplify it and make those simplistic to us. But if you can simplify it and even develop a composite score, then we have something that the entire firm could look at and consistently remember. But this is all things that we all know how to do. It's marketing of marketing.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I pick up on something, Ty, that Frank said at the beginning, right at the top of his remarks? He said the words, we all know what we're about. It's about profitable growth. And then when you decline everything else you said, Frank, and got down to evidence, there's an extra word that's important, and it's about predictable, profitable growth. And one of the tensions between finance and marketing, and between the cost side of the business and efficiency side of the business and the growth side of the business, is that cost is a more predictable factor than growth. And that's what wraps the evidence issue back up, is that marketers need to think about evidence not just of absolute growth, but about the predictability of that growth, because we don't live in moments in time, we live in continuums, and we're in a constant, not battle, that's the wrong word, but we're always competing for resources within the business. And we win as marketers if we can say that the allocation of resource to our discipline is the one that's going to produce growth, and that it's predictable growth, and that we are often proven right.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, because what it points to is an understanding of risk, and CFOs, risk is a really important topic. And if you can start to be predictable, if you can demonstrate an understanding of how your marketing is going to contribute, not only in the next 3 months or 6 months, but in the next 18 months, then I think you can have a much more powerful conversation with them, frankly. And it's an area that I don't think marketers focus on enough, and something that they can really contribute to, particularly if you have a strong brand.
Absolutely. So that's an area we can absolutely reclaim, is being able to communicate our own value and explaining how we create value over time in a way that's understood. And I just want to talk about this, because this is directly connected to what we're talking about now, the understanding of value. We are in a time right now where it's particularly important for us to be able to communicate that value and explain why we should continue to make investments, some of them longer term and even some short term changes. So we're navigating through a time right now where we're facing budget cuts. So let's get some advice from this group. Let's say you have an important budget meeting coming up, and you need to make a presentation, needs to be strong. What's missing right now in the approach that marketers have? What might you do to strengthen the case for a budget, and actually who might you work with to do that? So Frank, why don't we start with you on this question?
Yeah, so for me, this is all about trust in the organization. It's about how do marketers instill trust throughout the organization, including the finance team, particularly in times where this crisis that we've seen, and that to me starts with empathy. It's understanding how they are thinking, how they are feeling, what they need in order to move forward. And so, if you look at it that way, at least the CFOs that I know, and our CFO in particular, they're first trying to cover risk. And if you're in it full time, the budget cuts come because they're like, I see risk, and I'm going to cover that downside. And so I think you have to talk first in the language of how do you mitigate risk. But if you look at every company in industries that have gone through crisis, none have come out better unless they played offense and defense. And so the defense side and mitigating risk, and I would encourage everyone to study that translation chart that Fran has in the study, because I think that's just brilliant in terms of translating from marketing language to language of business and finance. But you also have to play offense, and to play offense in a way that would make the CFO and other members of the company comfortable. You have to start with something that's familiar with them. And some of I was spent time in the entertainment business, and the way all hits are made, you start with something familiar, and then you jump to the unfamiliar. Start with what's familiar, and then innovate on top of that. And I think we have an enormous opportunity to do that. And what's familiar is they know that clients are thinking a certain way. If you bring in the evidence and the insights and the data to support that, that could lead you to a place of saying, this is why we need to extend our brand in this time and actually spend more on our brand during this time rather than cut it. And so those are two things I would say: play offense and defense, understand the risk by understanding exactly how the CFO in the finance department is thinking about risk at that particular time.
I think Frank makes a super point about risk. I mean, there's 4 R's in the world. There's risk, there's and there's revenue. And you put all of those together, and then you can decode what's needed in the room at that time. Because it's very, very important for people that purport to understand consumers and consumer behavior, as marketers do, to understand those dynamics and to communicate which of the tools that are in use within the marketing team contribute to each of those. And contribute in the context of the mood and the needs of the enterprise at that time. And I think what we've been through, certainly through 2020, has sharpened our antenna a great deal to being empathetic towards other people in organizations, as well as empathetic to our customers, and to start with an assessment of what the upside and downside risks of what you're about to say is, and then to follow through with that to show the evidence for that assessment, and then bring your conclusions through based on that evidence, is a solid process-driven way of not winning. Because it's not about winning, it's about contributing effectively.
Mm-hmm. I suppose I would also add that I don't think marketers often talk enough about the risks of not investing. We are very focused on, on what will happen when we do. We don't always demonstrate, and the risk if we don't do this is X, Y, Z. So I think that's always important, because of course everybody works in a competitive environment. So if we don't do this, this is what our competitor is likely to do, and this is the result of that. I think that might be an angle that you could include. I would also strongly, depending on whether your budget meeting is next Monday or in October, I would get hold of somebody within finance and go through your narrative with them. This is what a lot of my respondents did. And they said, so how can I frame this so that the finance department will be more sympathetic and I can get my point across better? And, work together on the narrative of it so that it lands better with the audience. It's about doing your research, going back to what Frank was saying. It's about doing your marketing of that piece, understanding your audience, learning what they're trying to, what they are interested in, and then replaying it back to them. And that happens a lot.
A lot of great guidance there. We definitely want to start to build trust and find more allies within the finance organization. So I wanted to actually touch on the poll that we just delivered, because I think we can dive more deeply into the value part of the framework in our next question. So in the poll, the folks tuning in today say the area that they most want to invest in the value framework is actually value. So the communication of value internally, externally, and then perhaps getting a deeper understanding of how marketing is contributing to that value. That was also followed by evidence, and then understanding, getting about equal share of the poll results. So let's actually talk about value really quickly, because one of the things that in the report that stood out to me was this breakdown in the perception of value that finance and perhaps other parts of the C-suite have about what marketing is capable of. And then also within marketing itself, our own role being unclear about the value that we create. So let's talk about that for a bit. What do we need to understand about our capacity to create value? How should we be thinking about that differently and showing up from a value standpoint? Fran, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things that certainly within the B2B markets is really important is marketers, and many, obviously the successful ones realize this, is that the capacity for marketers to deliver on their brand promise and deliver on the expectation of the organization often relies on other functions. So, your capacity for creating real value, it is not just in your gift. It's in the gift of your persuasion, your ability to collaborate, your ability to work alongside other functions like operations or retail or whatever, and of course sales. So, you can't do it on your own. So one of the things I would say is that, an understanding that you're not on your own here, and you have to use other people to maximize the value of the brand very, very often in B2B sectors, because it's very, very people based very often. So I would start with that, really.
Great. And then Rob, what would you add to that?
Well, one of the features of understanding value in marketing is that there is a sense in some areas of the finance community, but not all, absolutely not all, that marketing is a faith-based discipline and theirs is a fact-based discipline. I believe that the work that the Institute does and the work that Fran has done, and also with Les Burnett and Peter Field over the last few months and years, has demonstrated that there is much fact-based evidence for supporting the contribution of brands and therefore marketing to business. And I believe that part of the education issue is an exchange between the finance function and the marketing function, for the marketing function to explain to the finance function how it thinks about costs versus how it thinks about investments, and how it thinks about the whole process of marketing and the valuation of brands and contribution over time. We haven't touched on time today, because what we're trying to achieve in the next week requires different strategies and tactics for what we're trying to achieve in the next quarter, which again demands different strategies and tactics to what we're trying to do over a 3 or 5 year horizon. And if we look at great businesses and we look at great brands, it's certainly true that many of them were built over time, and marketers really own the time-based value of brands, and communicating that to the finance community is particularly important. There's a lot of finance directors have told me in the past that marketers often place too much value and expectation on the short-term effect of marketing and not enough value on the long-term effect of marketing.
Yeah, and Robert, and I think that's happened in large part because many CMOs and marketers have received pressure from their finance partners to deliver an immediate return. Particularly B2B businesses, they'll say, I understand sales because there is a certain outcome. I've either gotten more money from this client or not, and I can judge that within a time period that's reasonable for me. When you get into things like R&D or marketing, you're right, this time-based component of it, I think we have to get better at progress, right, so that people feel more comfortable as they go along this journey. And so if it's a 5-year journey, they can see some milestones along the way. But let me say this, and I love this phrase, Rob, that you just used, that people often think of marketing as a faith-based discipline and not a fact-based discipline. And I think we have to become more fact-based for sure. At the same time, I think we have to realize that values actually drive value. And particularly in the period that we're in right now, right? We're this period of COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter, you're hearing more customers, business partners, communities, and other stakeholders say, I actually care about what you think. I actually care about what you're trying to accomplish in the community. I actually care about your purpose beyond profits. And that's an important role for marketers to play. Purpose is not the sole role of the marketer, but I think it's increasingly a role that marketers should lead on. It's going to increasingly become a core aspect of the corporate brand. We need to become more proficient at that, and underlying that, particularly when you get to the S and ESG, underlying that will be values.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll just sort of finish off that by saying that we can't get away from the fact that, and we shouldn't, is that one of the prime purposes of a brand is to charge a premium. Is to create the margin, and it's the marketing department that should be in control of that. So one of the things that I bring up in the report is the whole area of pricing. Is how much do marketers get involved, even at the edges, with how much their products and services are being charged for? Because within that lies a huge amount of value, and it's not something that marketers are focused on enough, in my view. And it's a massive value creator.
This was Ty. This was very elegantly summed up a few years ago by Jim Farley, who's just been announced as the new CEO of the Ford Motor Company. This was when he was a CMO of Ford. He was asked at a meeting I was in attendance at about which of his competitors did he worry about most. And he answered as quick as a flash. And he said, Hyundai on the one hand and Volkswagen on the other. And he worried about Hyundai because Hyundai could make exactly the same car as he could, but make it for less than the 10% less money than he could. And he worried about Volkswagen because they could make exactly the same car that he could and charge 10% more for it. And that was such an elegant description of the two sides of this problem and how marketing work. And that's a story that should be told to every CMO and CFO together, and to try and unpack what that means and how you can do both. Because Hyundai, of course, have come up in a world now where they can not only make a car for 10% less, they can also sell it for 10% more. And that's what winning's really about.
That sounds like a good opener for a conversation with finance. Speaking of which, we've got some audience members that could use some guidance and advice from this group on this very topic of brand building. So Derek is asking for tips as to how to talk with a CFO when quarterly earnings are showing success or maybe not successful sometimes. How do you convince them that we should still be investing in brand building? So we have talked a lot about how this brand building is a long-term investment in the future of the business. How do we convince them that this is the place to invest? What would you say to Derek on this topic?
You could start by looking at the empirical evidence. There is a wonderful deck that's been produced by the IPA and Binet and Field about the importance of brand building to produce profit for B2B organizations. And there's a whole deck and a report, and you could really do a lot worse than just starting there, because this is what other organizations have done, and it's in the B2B space. I would really start with that, really.
That's great advice. Yeah, there's excellent information on that report in making the case for continuing to invest in brand. And I would also point you to a report around all-weather marketing that's also available that talks about how you can invest in an economic downturn, and some information that'll help you make the case there as well.
I think that the empirical evidence is absolutely critical, but depending on the organization, sometimes you have to bring them along in understanding what is a brand and what potential a brand has. What I found is that oftentimes people have differing views of what a brand is, and they'll brush it aside, but some will say it's really just the logo or the name or the word mark. And some will go all the way to the point of saying it's the underlying values of the company and it's the consistent performance or purpose of the company. But it's a wide range. You have to land on a place where people have a consistent view, an aligned view, a shared view of what a brand really is before you can even start talking about the value that can deliver. But then part of the evidence can come from places other than marketing. And that's where I think it has a lot of power. If you go to talent recruiting, they know, and this is in the report also, they know that the brand, particularly the corporate brand, affects morale in the company, but it affects the ability to recruit talent and future talent. That is incredibly tangible. We're getting real-time data on that almost every single day. They're getting feedback in the interviews of what prospective talent expects from the company. And then your clients. Your clients are often indicating what they value. And in many cases, that space in between, the kind of the raw price that the competition would charge and what you're charging, unless you're a commodity, that is the brand. And the question is, the more we can actually uncover that and give language to exactly what those clients are valuing, what's the part of the perception, what increases that trust, then I think you have more confidence from non-marketers that this brand is worth something, it's worth investing in.
And I just add one final sort of tag to that is investing in a brand does not always just mean investing in advertising. There are many other aspects that build people's perception of brand. And it may be, for example, investing in improved customer service experiences, or investing in different and interesting and currently valuable CSR strategies that are all about investing in the brand. And I think one of the things that we do ourselves a disservice for in our relationships with CFOs is always translating the idea of investing in a brand into spending more money on advertising. The two things are not perfectly analogous.
Right on. Yeah, there's so many other areas.
One of my respondents talked about how he explained to his finance department about investing in brand being like supporting the balance sheet, whereas sort of the day-to-day was like the P&L. And he said, obviously, in a balance sheet, you don't look at it every day, but it's really, really important for the strength and health of the organization, that how fundamentally strong the organization is. Whereas the short term was the day-to-day stuff, was like the profit and loss account. And I thought that was quite interesting because it converted it again into the language that they understand. And I thought and he said it was really powerful for him.
Yeah, that's really helpful to translate the long-term and the short-term thinking in a way that...
Short-term thinking, profit and loss. Long-term thinking, strength of the health of the brand, balance sheet.
Right. So let's get to another question. And I know the purpose of the report isn't to recommend specific metrics. I know we looked at an ecosystem of metrics earlier, and people will have to make decisions on what metrics they choose. But Karina has a question for us, which is there a marketing metric or KPI that can be shared by the CFO and the CMO that can ensure that commitment at the CFO level? So is there perhaps a recommended KPI or an ecosystem of KPIs?
I don't think there can ever be one.
Right.
From talking to a lot of people, it tends to be like, if you get more than 3 or 4, people's eyes glaze over and they can't really focus. So 3 or 4, more importantly is for what it is to get agreement across the board on these are the things that we're going to measure our activity on. These are the things that we believe contribute to making the organization more successful. And rather than a whole series of them, or just choosing one, it's getting the agreement across the board.
Yeah, I think that's right, Fran. And I think as marketers, we have to be careful not to become pedantic about this. I said earlier that I've seen 19 variables, as KPIs, and that will never work. So one of the first things I did coming into BlackRock was to try to align with finance on what are the KPIs that the entire company will look to judge the effectiveness of marketing. And we chose 3 things, and it sounds simplistic. And by the way, the marketers were still doing a whole bunch of other things beneath it, and all sorts of analysis and metrics. But for the firm, we said we need something that's memorable, that's repeatable, that's simple and intuitive. And so we picked 3 things. We said on the brand side, we'll come up with a composite score, but they don't have to look at all the variables beneath that. Here's a composite score. Are we going up or down on that composite score? We said we want to acquire new clients, so acquisition. And then the last one was relationships. We want to know that we're deepening relationships with clients. And so we used NPS, not as the kind of the end all be all, but as a guide. And so we said, the thing you should remember is raising the bar: brand, acquisition, relationships. And then those are the 3 things we're going to look at. It is simple to the point of simplistic, but it was helpful because now everyone asks, on brand, what's the composite score? Everyone asks, we're deepening the relationship. Okay, what's the NPS score? How does it compare to competitors? And so, it's a helpful way to get the entire firm aligned.
That's
so,
great.
When I think about this, I'm largely on the same page as Frank. And what I like to find is a score that's most likely to lead to customer acquisition to and beyond my natural share in the market, and a measure that's likely to minimize customer churn relative to the market. And if I can find, and different businesses have different elements that input into that, but I would find an acquisition score and a churn prevention score as something that the finance department will understand easily and can be shared.
Other ones that I've heard, I mean, purchase intent is, you know, some people find that really powerful. If you're not in the consideration set, you've got a long way to go. You know, you've got to be in a consideration set. So that's one that comes up a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. You want to be speaking the common language, and you want to find metrics that communicate signal versus noise, as we're talking about.
Yeah.
Forward. So we have just a few minutes left. Thank you, Karina, for that question. By the way, we from Mir that I think would be a good question to close. Mir is looking for some advice of the conflict between CMOs and CFOs. And so the question here is that in the conflict, the CMO tends to be on the losing end of that. So some advice around how we can, or how we can resolve the problem overall. Like, what do we have for communication between CMOs and CFOs, and maybe not having it get to that point?
Mm.
I think this is what this whole conversation is about. I think that's what the report is about. And that conflict, that inherent conflict, I think is a result of CFOs and others in the organization actually looking at marketing as the black box. Yeah. And some people trust the black box, and they go like, you know what? I actually have no idea what you guys are doing, but I'm hearing good things in the marketplace. I'm out in the world, and people come back and they say good things to me, so I guess it's working well. And other people are distrustful of the black box. They're like, hey, we're just burning money because I have no idea what process you're going to. And so that's why I think the report is so important, because if they understand how you're creating value, if they understand how you're building kind of long-term growth and deeper loyalty, if they understand why this is strategically important for the company, then it's no longer a black box. And you have to get beneath some of the words that we often use. We use very lightly. We have to get beneath those words and help people understand exactly what they mean. Because I've come from a world where the organization understood marketing really well. And by being in this setting, I've had to actually deepen my own understanding of some of the words I was using and things that I took for granted. I had to get beneath and say, like, so what does it really mean? How is it really driving value? How does it really work? How do you connect the dots? And by the way, don't give them fake science, because if you can't draw a causal relationship between something and it's just a correlation, call it what it is. Yeah. It's a correlation. And that happens many places throughout the company.
Yeah. I would say that one of the just as Frank would say, said as well, it's about meeting these people, and it is about working alongside them. So a good example is one of the respondents I spoke to said that she'd started to get feedback via her staff that the finance department were really unhappy about how much they were spending. So she said, right, okay, well, we're going to do a big presentation and have a discussion with the entire finance department. And she put this together, and they now have quarterly meetings with a huge number of the finance departments. They can ask any questions they want. The CFO comes every quarter. I think they're with monthly meetings, monthly presentations. The CFO comes every quarter. And now they understand the decision processes. They and they say, I didn't realize there was so much in this. That's amazing. And that they're really advocating, going back to that relationship funnel.
Right.
It shows they're not dressing things up in a bow. Marketers tend to be very optimistic. Yeah. And that just really undermine potentially the trust within the CFOs. One of the CFOs I spoke to said that anything that marketing said, he just cut in half in terms of what they were going to deliver, and then he could work with that. And it's a problem.
Rob, any final words on the relationship?
Well, the one thing CFOs and CMOs always share are the same ultimate stakeholders, whether they're the employees, the customers, the share owners, the regulators, and so forth, which leads you to only one conclusion, that they are ultimately on the same side. And I think the thing that this report is about, as much as anything else, is how do you get people on the same side between marketing and finance, and it's great for that.
Great, thank you, Rob. So I think, and this is a conversation about human relationships, and it's going to transfer over. It's a cultural shift. It's management even. And so as you look at this framework, hopefully the conversation has been of value. You don't have to tackle everything at once. You know, whole value in order, but you can start somewhere in this relationship. I want to thank you so much, all of our speakers for today, Frank, Rob, and Fran, for sharing such amazing guidance with us. I want to thank our audience for all of the amazing chats and questions throughout the conversation as well. If you're looking to dive more deeply into this, please visit b2binstitute.org. This paper is paper brand building ways to become a more effective. So if we can be of service to you, feel free to reach out to your LinkedIn rep. Let us know what you thought about today. Definitely improve this experience for you. So fill surveys we're going to share with you right now. Let us know how we improve. And with that, see you in another episode of Live with Marketers. Very much.